The dining room was too small for the number of people inside it. That happened every Thanksgiving. Extra chairs appeared from closets. Children occupied folding tables in nearby rooms. Conversations overlapped until individual voices became impossible to separate. From a distance, it looked like the kind of family gathering people remember fondly. Up close, it contained all the usual complications. At one end of the table sat Robert. At the other sat his son, Ethan. Neither expected trouble that afternoon, yet both carried a tension that had been building for years. Robert loved giving advice. Not because he enjoyed controlling people, because experience had taught him how expensive mistakes could become. He had built a business, survived difficult economic periods, and navigated setbacks that younger relatives only knew through stories. Offering guidance felt natural, helpful, almost automatic. Ethan experienced those moments differently. At 32, he had spent years building a life independent of his father's influence, a career, a home, relationships, decisions. Yet every family gathering seemed to produce another reminder that his father still viewed him as someone who required supervision. Neither perspective was entirely wrong. That was the problem. Throughout the afternoon, small examples accumulated. Robert commented on a possible investment. Later, he questioned a work decision. Then he offered suggestions regarding future plans. None of the comments were aggressive. Most relatives barely noticed them. Ethan noticed everyone, not because the advice itself bothered him, because of what it represented, a familiar assumption that someone else always knew better. By dinner, the tension had become invisible but unmistakable, like humidity before a storm. Conversation eventually shifted toward career changes. A cousin discussed leaving a stable job to pursue something new. People offered opinions, questions followed. The discussion moved naturally around the table until attention landed on Ethan. He had recently made a significant professional decision. One Robert still questioned privately. The father listened for a moment, then offered what sounded like another piece of practical advice. To most people, it seemed harmless, a suggestion, a warning based on experience. To Ethan, it sounded exactly like dozens of conversations before it. The final straw rarely looks dramatic. It usually looks ordinary. That's what makes it difficult to recognize. Robert finished speaking, silence followed, then Ethan responded. His voice wasn't loud, it didn't need to be. Dad, not every decision I make requires your approval. The room froze, forks stopped moving, conversations disappeared, children in the next room suddenly seemed very far away. Ethan immediately regretted how sharp the words sounded, but once spoken they remained. Robert stared at him, not angry, surprised. The surprise hurt more because it revealed how differently they understood the situation. For several seconds nobody knew what to say, then someone changed the subject. Dinner continued. At least technically, yet everyone could feel the discomfort moving through the room. Robert became quieter. Ethan did too. The argument never happened. In some ways that made things worse, the emotions remained unresolved. After dinner, people drifted into smaller groups. Football played in the background. Deserts appeared. The family attempted to restore normality. Meanwhile, Robert stood alone on the back porch, watching leaves move through the cold evening air. He replayed the exchange repeatedly, not the words themselves, what sat underneath them. For the first time, he considered the possibility that his son wasn't rejecting advice. He might be rejecting something else entirely. An hour later, several relatives gathered around a fire pit. Among them was Margaret, Robert's 80-year-old aunt. She had known him his entire life, including versions of him many younger family members had never seen. The conversation wandered through family history. Stories resurfaced, old memories emerged. Eventually, Margaret smiled and looked directly at Robert. You know who you remind me of today? A few relatives laughed. Robert shook his head. No idea, your father. The group became noticeably quieter. Margaret continued. When you were 28, your father spent 2 years telling you not to start your company. Several people looked surprised. Robert certainly did. He remembered those arguments clearly. Margaret smiled. You hated every minute of it. Soft laughter spread through the group. Even Robert smiled reluctantly. The memory returned immediately. The frustration, the certainty that nobody trusted his judgment, the feeling of constantly defending his own choices. Margaret leaned back in her chair. Funny thing about becoming parents. Nobody interrupted. We eventually forget what it felt like to be someone else's child. The fire crackled softly. For a moment nobody spoke. The observation landed with unusual precision, not because it assigned blame, because it revealed a pattern. Across the yard, Ethan stood near the patio speaking with cousins. Robert watched him differently now, not as a child making decisions, as an adult trying to own them. Later that evening, as relatives prepared to leave, father and son found themselves loading chairs into the garage. The conversation began awkwardly. Most important conversations do. Finally, Robert spoke. I wasn't trying to tell you what to do. Ethan nodded. I know. A pause followed, then Robert added something he rarely admitted. I might not be very good at knowing where advice ends and interference begins. The statement hung between them. Ethan laughed softly, not because it was funny, because it was honest. That's probably fair. For the first time all day, the tension eased, not disappeared, eased. The difference mattered. Neither man changed completely that night. Robert would probably continue offering advice. Ethan would probably continue resisting some of it. Relationships rarely transform through a single conversation. But as the last car pulled away and the Thanksgiving gathering finally ended, something had shifted, not power, not authority, understanding, and sometimes understanding accomplishes what arguments never can.